This is an Introduction to English Grammar, Part 17, Voice. This is for a course given at the University of Utah, and my name is Karen. The things we're going to be looking at today, we're going to be looking at the structure of active and passive sentences. The difference between what these sentences are we call voice, so we'll in general be looking at voice. We'll see a few examples of what we call middle voice. And passive sentences are good examples of why it's important to separate grammatical roles from meaning. So we'll look a little bit about this at the syntax and the semantics of these sentences. And we'll look at two different types of passives, get passive and be passive. So we've learned that English canonical word order is subject, verb, object. So something like Bill ate the cake, where Bill is the subject, the verb is ate, or the action, and the thing that he ate is called the object. Okay, so this is an active voice sentence. In order to talk about the semantic role or the meaning role, we're going to look at this as agent. That's the person or thing who's doing the action, and then the recipient or theme. Okay. So we can look at it both ways. We can look at the grammatical role or the syntax, and we can look at the semantic role or the meaning. When we look at passive sentence, the grammatical word order is the same. So we still have a subject and then a verb, and then we have a by phrase now instead of an object. It's more like an object of a preposition. However, the roles switch with the semantic order. So we now have the theme, or the thing that was eaten, is now first in that subject position, where before we had Bill in the subject position. Okay? And then we have the verb, and then the agent now comes at the end. So what happens is our syntactic roles or our grammatical roles are the same in a passive voice sentence, but our semantic roles or our thematic, sometimes people say thematic roles, are switched. So passive sentences are formed by having a subject and a verb in the passive form. The passive form of the verb is made with the auxiliary to be and the past participle. We've already seen past participles as we looked at verb forms. Okay, here are some examples. I am given a book. Okay, the form of to be agrees grammatically with the subject. I was given a book. I have been given a book. I will be given a book. And the by phrase, it's optional. We don't have to have the by phrase in order to make the sentence grammatical. So a sentence with the by phrase is called a full passive. A sentence without a by phrase is a truncated passive. So in the sentences above, they are all truncated passives because they don't have the by phrase, or they don't indicate who actually gave the book. Okay, the verb agrees with the grammatical subject, which we already covered. Something like the cakes were eaten by Bill. Okay, by Bill is that by phrase that gives us the full passive. Okay, here we have many sentences where we're looking at whether they are passive or active voice. Okay, go ahead and take a second to determine whether those are passive or active voice, and unpause the video when you're ready to go on. The answers are on the next slide. So in these sentences, as we look at them, the announcer reported the results. We have both the subject, which is before the verb, and the agent is the same. So they're both active sentences. But here we have a sentence, he was frightened by the loud noise. The loud noise is the agent, the thing that does the frightening. Sometimes I say the thing that does the verb. So the loud noise does the frightening, but he is the subject. So when the agent does not match the subject, or when the agent is not in subject position, then we call those passive sentences. You can also see we have to be plus the past participle, and then we have a by phrase. Okay, the deer was killed by the hunter. My sister won the contest is an active voice. The passive voice would be something like the contest was won by my sister. Okay, let's take a look at the rest of these. Okay. Now we have several sentences where we need to turn them into passives. So the little dog buried the dirty old bone would look something like the dirty old bone was buried by the dog. Okay, I'm going to give you several sentences. Go ahead and take a minute to turn those into the passive forms just for practice. Okay. I'll give you one other example. So something like number 10, your attitude surprises me. In the passive, we would need to move me to the subject position. So we would say something like, I am surprised by your attitude. Okay, so switching the semantic roles of the things that are in the sentence, not switching the grammatical roles. We have to take a look at full passives versus truncated passives. So full passives are the version of the sentence where we include the object of the preposition with the word by. So we include the by phrase. Okay? A truncated passive is where we don't express that part and we leave that off. So here's an example. Active sentence, Melissa turned off the computer. Full passive, the computer was turned off by Melissa. And truncated passive, the computer was turned off. One of the properties of passives, we have to take a look at why prescriptivists disagree with them, and then we'll talk about why I think they are very useful tools for us in our language. Okay, so prescriptivists prohibit passive voice because they like concise language. They think that action is more important and less boring, and they see passive sentences as redundant. I would disagree with that. You should always check with your professor about how they feel about passive sentences because some fields of study use it more than others. At the end of this presentation, we'll see a little bit how they're used in the sciences. So passives are really important to some fields of study. So professors disagree on whether or not they should be used. Let's talk a little bit about why we might decide to leave off an agent in a passive sentence. So one of the reasons why passive sentences can be very useful is because we can actually delete the agent of the sentence. So this can be used to our advantage. So for example, if I want to talk about my wallet being stolen and I don't know who did it, then I might just say my wallet was stolen this afternoon. I can make that an active sentence by saying the thief stole my wallet, or the robber stole my wallet, or the man in the white coat stole my wallet. But often we discuss those things when we don't know who it is with agent deletion and in the passive. So instead we just say my wallet was stolen. A second reason is that sometimes we like to conceal who the agent is. So lawyers use this as a common tool when they are talking about things that may or may not have been their client. So I can say the sentence, mistakes were made. If I want to include the by phrase, I might say something like, mistakes were made by me. But if I made mistakes, why would I want to include that? So instead, I just say, oh, it looks like some mistakes were made. Or I might say something more likely at my house, someone ate the cookies, or the cookies were eaten, even though I know that it was me. So someone ate the cookies would be the active, the cookies were eaten would be the passive. Okay? Sometimes we leave the agent off because the agent is very obvious. Okay. One of the most famous sentences that we all use as a passive is to talk about when we were born. So I was born in, and then the year, or the place. We very rarely put that sentence into an active version, which would be something like, my mother bore me. That's highly unusual, and I can't think of a single time other than a grammar class where I've ever heard that sentence uttered. Okay. Sometimes we do it because the agent is unimportant. So the book was published in 1998. We may not really care who the publisher of the book is. The important information is about the book. So we make these decisions based on what types of things we want to talk about in our sentences. Okay. Sometimes it has to do with the content of the sentence, so what we think of as being important. Okay. So in this case, if we think that certain content is more important than another, we keep the order in one way or another. So the semantic word order, or whether it's active or passive, to help us talk about a specific topic. Okay. So we could say something like 100 have been killed in Iraq versus insurgents have killed 100. A new library was built versus construction workers built a new library. So whether you want the focus in the first one to be on the people who were killed or the insurgents who did the killing, or in the second one, whether you want the focus to be on the library or the construction workers. We have a third voice that our book briefly talks about called middle voice. This is something that is kind of tricky, and we don't talk about it very often or identify it very often. So here's an active sentence: Bill cut the cake. Passive sentence is the cake was cut by Bill. The third voice would be something like this: the cake cuts easily. So now we're describing properties of the cake and not about who did it or who it was done to or what it was done to. Okay. Middle voice, is often ignored by prescriptivists. Okay. So I hope that you can see how this sentence is a little bit different. There are not too many instances. It tends to be specific types of verbs that we use for this middle voice. Here are some examples. The cake cuts easily. The butter melts smoothly. These pants iron easily. This book reads well. So again, it's describing the property of the subject instead of describing who has done something or what has done something. Okay, it's on page 141 of our textbook. Probably the second edition is that page number. Okay, here we're looking at, again, kind of what it is that we want to be the focus. So we have two different passages. I'll read these for you. Just listen and see which one you think is better. Okay, the first one is this: the tragic deaths of many Americans on September 11, 2001 are difficult to forget. On that day, terrorists killed hundreds when they flew planes into the towers of the World Trade Center. Terrorists attacked others at the Pentagon. An accident killed passengers on another plane in what was apparently an attempt to stop the plane from reaching another deadly target. The number of deaths can be compared to the number of people that died in the great battles of the American Civil War. Okay, passage number 2 changes the focus of the paragraph by using passive voice. The tragic deaths of many Americans on September 11, 2001 are difficult to forget. On that day, hundreds were killed when airplanes crashed into the towers of the World Trade Center. Still others were attacked in the Pentagon. Passengers on another plane were killed in what was apparently an attempt to stop the plane from reaching another deadly target. The number of deaths can be compared to the number of people that died in the great battles of the American Civil War. So here we have two different passages, one that's focused on the active sentences, where it has to then focus on the terrorists or the people who are performing the attacks, where we might choose to use passage 2 instead to focus on the victims or those who were killed during those attacks. My preference would be to go with something like passage 2 because I like to focus more on those people who died instead of giving attention or media attention to the terrorists. But that's a personal choice for me. Okay, so this is looking at passive and topic comment structure. What we were looking at in the previous paragraphs, we're looking at our topic comment structure. So we decided that the topic in paragraph 1, the topic was the terrorists, and we were commenting on it about the people. Okay, the second paragraph for me flows better because the topic of the paragraph is the people who died, and then commented on by the how and the what. Okay, so sometimes we use topic comment structure, or we choose to have some part of the sentence come first in order to preserve this structure. Okay, linguists who study this information identify that many sentences are made up of two parts, the topic and the comment. So passive voice makes it possible for us to keep that order when we're speaking or writing. Passive voice is especially useful when the recipient of the action is the topic. So something like my wallet getting stolen. Passive voice would be more useful to preserve that as the topic of what I'm talking about. Okay, it's one of the most important uses of topic voice. Okay, so here's an example of passive in scientific writing. Often scientific writing uses passive to preserve part of this topic comment structure. So they're talking about what people have done or what the experiments show or what it is that was performed on the machines instead of necessarily who did it. Okay. Let's take a quick look at the objects in passives so that you can see where the objects are. Okay. Here we have a sentence, Sarah gave Pete a book. Okay. The direct object in this sentence, we have to make a decision, is it Pete or is it a book? Well, I can do a quick test to see about what the direct and indirect objects are by moving Pete to the end and seeing what happens. So if I say Sarah gave a book, I'd have to say to Pete. So that indicates that Pete in this sentence is the indirect object in the inverted word order. Okay, and a book is the direct object. So direct object is a book, Pete is the indirect object. Okay, if we change this to a passive sentence, we actually have two options. Pete was given a book by Sarah, or a book was given to Pete by Sarah. So we're still adding our by phrase, but now our indirect object, when it's used in the object position, in that second position, that we have to use the to phrase with it. We have to use the preposition with it. Okay, so when we are turning something into a passive, we move the object to the beginning. Here's something for you to know about passives. Okay, these passives, okay, do not generally have these actives do not generally have a corresponding passive form. They have been forging many checks. Would be something like many checks have been being forged by them. Okay, the class will have been studying the complex tenses. The complex tenses will have been being studied by the class. Okay, these are pretty awkward in the passive. So our textbook says that because this type of tense, the progressive tenses, were not used until the late 18th century, that may be why they weren't used as passives. So they came after we had formed a lot of passives. Okay, so more modern things would not be as good for passives as others. Okay. We also need to talk about the get passive. So in English, we have two different ways to form a passive. We can use to be or we can use get. Okay, as we look at the get passives, okay, it would look something like this. Her wallet got stolen yesterday. Sammy got arrested for a crime he didn't commit. And the car got wrecked. As a native English speaker, you are likely to have some intuitions about that and some feelings about how you feel about speakers who use these types of passives. Okay? In standard American English, we often view these as somehow being not as good of passives as the to be passive. So my wallet was stolen yesterday. Okay? However, in British English, this is the more acceptable form often. Okay? Here are some differences. Okay, so was Bruno arrested? No, he wasn't even caught. Did Bruno get arrested? No, he didn't even get caught. Okay, the get passives seem to like the progressives more than the be passive. Okay, so for me, it is ungrammatical to say his plans have been being sidetracked for years. But if I say his plans have been getting sidetracked for years, my mental grammar says that that one's okay. So those previous sentences we said we don't really use in English very much, we can actually use with the get passive. Okay? It also isn't usually used with an agent. Okay? My purse got stolen by my brother. It would be more common for us to say my purse got stolen. Okay. Here are some other examples about the differences. For me, as a native English speaker, I actually have a very large meaning difference. So she was transferred versus she got transferred. He was arrested versus he got arrested. She was chosen versus she got chosen. All of these for me have the person has more impact in what happened in the verb. Okay, so this paragraph explains that we often feel like there's some sort of psychological involvement, that get has a special nuance that has a stronger sense of the subjects being involved in what it is that happens. Okay. Differences in meaning. Okay. We also sometimes use the get passive to indicate things that are undesirable instead of the be passive. She was picked for the extra work assignment. Oh, she was picked for the extra work assignment, or she got picked for the extra work assignment. Seems like there's some sort of negative involved with the get there. Okay. The prescription, okay, is that get passives are seen as more informal. Okay, and if they're informal, what do you think prescriptivists say about them? Well, they don't really love them. So anything that's informal doesn't belong in English or with what we're working on. Okay, so if you ever wonder about whether or not you should use those, you should talk to someone. Many times I told you that we have this feeling that it is not as acceptable. Sometimes in American English we view those get passives actually as being uneducated. So you'll want to double check what your professor's feelings are for those types of passives. Okay, so we've learned how to recognize the differences between active and passive based on the grammatical roles and the thematic or semantic roles and how those look different in different types of active or passive voice sentences. Okay. We also learned that passive is stigmatized in prescriptive circles. Okay. On our exam, I'm going to ask you some questions about what sentences a prescriptivist would prefer. So we would prefer an active sentence over a passive one, and we prefer the to be passive over the get passive. Okay, and passives are very useful for us. So even though prescriptivists frown on them, they're very useful for us for when we don't want to express the agent or to leave the agent unexpressed for some other reason.